Hi, Kate. How are you?
Hello, I'm terrific. How are you?
Okay. Well, I went and saw Twisters last night, and I thought that was going to be the most exciting thing to happen this weekend.
I mean, it is pretty
And
exciting.
it is an exciting movie. Like I liked the movie a lot. So
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to your thoughts. You've written a bunch on this.
I
You've
have.
written a bunch on the first film, which we'll talk about today, and also I saw you said you had a lot of thoughts on this particular movie. So I
Yeah,
am very excited to
yeah.
talk to you about this movie because I also have thoughts, but they're probably nowhere near as well considered as yours.
I'm
Mine are
excited
mostly
to hear
like,
your thoughts too.
okay, well, let's do this.
Okay,
Let's get into this. All right, let's talk about it. You want to introduce yourself for people who did not listen to you 2 weeks ago?
absolutely.
So
So, I am Kate Carpenter. I'm a historian of science. I'm working on a project about the history of storm chasing. So, this is a well-timed movie for me. Actually, it would have been better timed if I had a book to promote rather than one in progress. But someday.
no
And
wait.
Yep, and I am also the
That's when we
host
bring
of
you back.
Drafting the Past. Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
When
yeah.
when
Well,
Twister
that's when we
3
bring you
comes
back
out.
for Sharknado.
There you go.
So, okay, I just talked to. All right, I'm fired up. I'm excited. Let's do a couple things. If you're listening right now, I always say that. That's so dumb. If you're listening right now, of course you're listening right now. There's not a version of Braille for this. All right, what we're gonna do? We're gonna do some general impressions of the film. We're gonna talk about maybe the history of storm chasing in general, some basic ideas behind tornadoes, where they come from, basic stuff like that, and then we'll get into a spoiler-filled discussion of the film. So if you have not seen the film, we are not going to spoil the film just yet. We'll give you a heads up before we jump into spoiling the film. We'll give you enough time to say pause this podcast if you're considering to go see this film. I think we're both going to say go see the movie and go from there. So, all right, Kate, general impressions of the movie. What did you think? You saw it Friday night, right?
I saw it Friday night. It was super fun. I think I told you the last time I was on the show that I was trying to have like low expectations because I didn't want to be disappointed. But I was really excited just to have the chance to maybe see like a good popcorn movie again, like old fashioned. And I felt like it totally fulfilled that for me. I have many quibbles, many like historical and scientific, issues as you would expect, but it was very fun. Had a good time. How about you?
Yeah, as a movie. So I saw it last night. I invited my 12-year-old is here, and he didn't want to go see. He doesn't like loud films. And the thing
It was fun.
I remember from the first time I saw it when I first saw Twister back
Mhm.
in when it came out 96, 94, somewhere in
Yep,
there range.
96. Yep.
96. I remember how loud it was.
Mhm.
It was a really loud film, and this was one of the big things about it. It was a really special effects driven film in a way that we'd never seen a
Mhm.
act of God on film before, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's one of its great legacies. So he didn't want to go see it. It's fine. So I wouldn't. I still got two seats, so I could like set my popcorn next to me, and I could decide who I wanted to sit next to in the theater.
Okay, you
I
have
also
options.
sat. Oh yeah. I go to Cinemark, and I can get like I get like the points, so I get like a free movie
Okay,
every month, or I pay $10 and I get a discount, whatever.
sure. Yeah.
And then my seats were F7 and F8, which were like foreboding. Those are beyond. I almost set an
Yes.
F5 but I didn't want to sit just off. That was going to
Sure.
drive me nuts.
Sure.
I really enjoyed the film.
Mhm.
Felt in a lot of ways like an ideal summer movie that you can bring the kids to. Like if you want to bring them to a
Okay.
blockbuster film that's got it's got a lot of effects and sound and there's some action and there's stuff going on. At the same time, there's nothing really here that they can't see.
That's
Right.
true.
So
It
this
is.
was in a
I'm
lot of
sure it's
ways
scary for kids, but
sure, right? But there's no sex here, and there's no
right.
like
Yeah. There's not
there's
much
no
language.
language.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing here that I wouldn't be like I would caution like my 12-year-old wants to go see a movie, an action
Mhm.
movie. This is a good movie to see, and it's got some pretty cool fleshed out characters. In the film, we've got a pretty diverse range of people in
Mhm.
this film, which I
Absolutely.
dug. Strong men, strong women. Things felt like pretty well written. So I was enjoying what I saw on screen. I was enjoying maybe the thought processes behind the decisions that were made. There's one big one that's kind of being talked about right now as far as the decision that was made not to have something in the film. We'll get to that at the very end.
Okay.
Uh, but aside from that, really enjoyed the film thus far. So I'm excited to go in there. So let's jump into this.
Great.
This movie's about storm chasers. It's about a woman. It's about her own personal chase
It
with her
is.
own personal storm, I think.
Yes.
I
Overcoming her
guess.
trauma.
Oh boy, so are we over that scar, right? All
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
there's a scar. All right, so let's talk about this. I think by now we're all familiar with the idea of storm chasing because Twister, as you talk about, really kind of put this on the map in a
Mhm.
ways that maybe people weren't familiar with before. And I think now with the advent of social media, which was definitely a change since the last film. What is storm chasing, and like where does this idea come from? Let's
Sure.
jump into like the behind the scenes stuff on
Yeah.
Twisters
So
first.
there are a bunch of ways you can define storm chasing. I
Okay.
define it as trying to make a forecast about where a potentially tornado producing storm will occur and then going out in a vehicle to try to intercept that storm. And I focus on tornadoes as storm chasing. There are hurricane chasers and even hail chasers, other kinds of sort of storm chasing. And I'm not like interested in gatekeeping it. But in terms of talking about like the history, I focus just on that tornado aspect. And there's an argument that it goes way back, but part of the reason I define it that way is that it kind of limits it to this point in the 1950s when people, thanks to the creation of radar, start realizing like maybe they could predict where a tornado is more likely to occur, and they have access to cars and better highway systems, and so they can actually get to them. And so, to me, that is kind of the key moment there. And it starts out, in the 50s, there are just a couple of guys. One, he's actually not even a research scientist officially. He's a forecaster, a meteorologist named Neil Ward, but he gets obsessed with tornadoes. He starts building models of them in his garage. And it's kind of a side project of his work at the National Weather Service. And as part of that, he decides he teams up with the Oklahoma State Highway Patrol to try to see if he can go out in a car and get close to a tornado and take photographs of it. So he's able to do that in the late 1950s. And then there's another guy, David Hoadley, who is not a scientist at all. He gets really interested in tornadoes as a teenager in North Dakota. And he decides just to kind of teach himself how to forecast. He starts hanging out at National Weather Service offices and learning about the weather and starts doing his own chases. And what boggles my mind always about Dave Hoadley is that he's
Mm-hmm.
up there in North Dakota doing this by himself, teaching himself these things, like this kind of affable but weird guy in the National Weather Service office. And he chases for a couple of years before he actually sees a tornado. So he's like doggedly determined to make this happen. But then really like through the 60s, Hoadley's out there still chasing. There's a few other people just doing it for fun, but it's not really till the early 1970s that real like focused scientific storm chasing takes place at the National Severe Storms Lab in Norman, Oklahoma. And that's kind of the real like full-fledged birth of scientific storm chasing.
All right, I want to ask you about this because I hear about this. I lived in Wichita, Kansas for 5 years. It's like
Mm-hmm.
when I moved to Wichita, that's when tornadoes became part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
If you're out there and you're Wichita, you know that every Monday at noon, the tornado alarm.
Yep.
Every
Here's
single Monday.
Wednesdays at 11. Yep.
Absolutely right, and it's just part of it because it's part of the negotiations you make with the landscape to live in that place, right? Just like in Florida, we've got hurricanes and bad governors, and in other
We have
places,
that too.
you've got whatever. So, I want to ask you: is tornadoes are not unique to the United States? Are there storm chasers elsewhere? Are we familiar with this? Like
Mm-hmm.
where are we the only crazy, batshit crazy people doing this? Like, what's going on
So
here?
tornadoes are not unique to the United States. They can
Okay.
actually occur basically anywhere. They're more common in some places. Actually, I believe the greatest number of fatalities from tornadoes happens in Bangladesh, I want to say. Yeah, but a huge part is, so one, there's a concentration in the US of
Mm.
frequency of tornadoes, but the other big thing is just the conditions that make storm chasing possible, right? So the American Midwest is flat, which makes it a lot easier to, I shouldn't say entirely flat, but there's a lot of flatness. It
There's
makes
like
it
two
easier.
hills.
It makes it easier to see what's coming over the hill, and we have the gridded highway system, and it's just not as populated, and so it makes chasing a lot more feasible than it is in other places. There is historically, and I think still, a contingent of Australian storm chasers because they have
Really?
some similar conditions there.
Okay. So first of all, I was at the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo over the
Okay.
weekend with my mom on my birthday, And she kept telling everybody it was my birthday. And then I was like, Mom, stop.
That's so
Just fucking
cute.
stop already, right? That's so annoying. We got to the Australia section. And I'm just like, Wallaby, right? So now in my head, I've got this idea of just super cute little humans called Australians who are out there looking at tornadoes. It's just, I don't know. Do they call them tornadoes?
I think
In
so.
Australia?
I think so.
Like,
Yeah.
is it a cyclone elsewhere? Or is like, I don't know.
So a cyclone is technically a different thing.
Okay.
Yeah. A cyclone is I think part. Oh gosh, I'm going to get this wrong. Boy, meteorologists listening, please forgive me. But I think it's part of a hurricane, and if I'm not
right.
confused, if I'm not mistaken, I think a cyclone doesn't touch down is the wrong term, but on land, and so that is part of the difference. But people call it that colloquially all the time.
No, but I'm just like now I want to get on YouTube and like look for Australian storm chasers. First, I want to see the accents, but I also well, the two countries have very similar things, right? I think the interior of Australia is more rugged than perhaps the plains. I think you're absolutely right. One of the joys of living on the plains, people out there who live like in Kansas absolutely love like the sunrises and sunsets over these big, beautiful skies and the sunflowers and things like that. So yeah, in both films, you see people just tearing ass across the plains. Like any movie in like set in the Midwest has to have that, like in Interstellar when they start going to look for the drone. But I want to talk about a very specific area because we should probably list out. It's not a surprise that both Twister films are set in Oklahoma.
Sure.
Tornado Alley. So where is Tornado Alley itself? Like, let's define this.
So it's worth remembering that Tornado Alley is not actually like a scientific term. It's actually
Bullshit.
it was a phrase created by the media, and people use it as a sort of familiar idea, and it kind of stretches like Great Plains from Texas and Oklahoma up to the Great Lakes and sort of that area of Great Plains in Midwest. It's where, in theory, where the greatest frequency of tornadoes occurs every year. But a lot of people, especially these days, have pointed out that Tornado Alley is kind of a problematic phrase because it makes people feel like that's where tornadoes live and nowhere else. And in reality, especially in the US, we have a huge number of tornadoes in especially the Southeast. And that's actually where some of our biggest and most dangerous and certainly most fatal tornadoes have happened and are happening now. And so, some people call it Dixie Alley, that area down there. But yeah.
Well, it's you bring up a really good point, and I'm wondering if this is associated with climate change because as a guy who grew up in Kentucky and Louisiana, tornadoes weren't really part of our lives growing up. Now, what we did have are, massive, amazing, beautiful thunderstorms that would kind of crackle, and I'd be at my grandparents' house. It would be amazing. But we really didn't have to worry about tornadoes. And it's funny because now I talked to my mom. They live under tornado watch in Western Kentucky all the time. And you were saying, we've had these massive tornadoes. We had one that hit in Mayfield, Kentucky, which is in Western Kentucky a few years ago. Nashville got hit. Feels like Alabama is constantly getting smacked. What's the role here? Is this due to climate change? Are just conditions becoming more and more right as the Earth heats up? What's driving, or have they always kind of been there? I guess is my other question.
Yeah, I mean, I'll caution that I'm not a meteorologist, so this is my informed outsider view.
Please,
but my understanding is that they have always been there, but my understanding is that climate change seems to be pushing tornadoes more toward the southeast, more even to the East Coast. New York has had some small tornadoes and warnings recently, and then making them perhaps bigger, more concentrated, sometimes happening at unusual times of year that we didn't usually think of as tornado season. And so at this point, there seems to be a sense not so much that climate change is causing more tornadoes, but it's changing how and when they're occurring.
Okay. I kind of wonder, and again, we see so much allusions in this film. A slight spoiler here, but this happens in the first film. The allusions to Wizard of Oz, which we have to at some point in time cover. I'm watching this movie going, God, we got to get Wizard of Oz on the pod.
Yeah,
and I think I've got to get like native Kansans on the
Sure,
podcast to do that one?
sure.
I
Yeah.
guess I don't know. But I kept wondering, for Oklahoma specifically, if maybe this was just God getting back at us for Toby Keith. Um, what
Preemptively?
explains why Oklahoma? Maybe, I guess, However, I'm kind of wondering if in your own research, and I do want to talk about your research as you're coming along. Um, do Tornadoes are treated oftentimes in films as
Mhm.
this great act of God or environmental disaster, things like that. Is there an idea that tornadoes fill an ecological niche? Is there a good that comes out of tornadoes? Like what are there benefits here? Like
So
how do we look at tornadoes in that regard? Do we know?
I have to tell you, I'm so glad, listeners, I'm revealing some behind the scenes here, but I'm so glad you tipped me off to this question ahead of time because I've never thought about this question before. So I went to research it so I wouldn't sound like a total idiot. And the answer is we don't know. There does not seem to be a strong indication that there is one. A lot of scientists have wondered sort of what atmospheric niche tornadoes are playing, and the like sort of technical answer has to do with moving air really efficiently. But the interesting thing is you compared them sort of thinking about like wildfires and the restorative
Hmm.
ecological role that wildfires play. And the real thing is that tornadoes, contrary to how movies kind of make us feel, are actually pretty rare. They hit sort of sporadically and not as commonly as we might kind of have the impression of, and so they don't play that like role that a wildfire does. When a tornado hits, it hits in actually a very small place, which can be devastating if there are a lot of people, of course, in that place. But from like a big ecological standpoint, it's really not that huge of an impact. But I think so much tornado research has really focused on warning purposes, and how we can forecast and warn about them, and that's been a smaller area of research. So I think there are still a lot of questions about what a tornado is actually doing in the world.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes these films really interesting is because here we are in 2024 and we're still questioning like what's with this wind, like
Mhm.
how do we understand it, and some of the questions that in Twisters were being asked 30 years ago in Twister, and I'm like, we haven't figured that out yet. Like
And we're being asked in 1972 when they did the first scientific intercept.
thank you. Right. And I
Mhm.
sometimes look like as a historian, part of me is also a bit of a snob. And I look back in time, I'm like, 300 years ago, you didn't know that. You're so dumb. And now I'm like, we don't have, how do we not know how a tornado works? Like
Right. I mean, we know a
why
whole
don't we
lot more
know?
than we used to.
Sure.
But it's fascinating that all this information has been sort of filled in around, but there are still these really central questions of like, why do some thunderstorms make tornadoes and others don't? And we just don't know.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's driving maybe these films is the idea of how people live with this.
Mhm.
This is much more about using tornadoes to talk about a young woman's trauma and coming to
Mhm.
terms with that and moving past that, which I think it does really, really, really well. But I do want to like talk about the lived experiences because my time in Kansas changed the way I look at tornadoes so freaking much. And if my buddy Levi Henry is out there right now, or my friend John DeCessor out there, you guys friggin' like, I became so numb to tornadoes after 5 years. I was whatever, and I'll get into it. So, all right, I want to jump into the movie now. We kind of set some background here on
Excellent.
what Tornado Alley is and storm chasing and stuff like that. If you have not seen the film yet, first of all, go see the movie. Don't wait to go. Like, let's save the movie industry because the
Yeah,
rest of the world is going to hell. So let's do that.
I saw.
Um,
Did you see the ticket sales projections are like way beyond what they
it's
hoped that they would
below.
be?
It's blowing up.
Hmm.
It's done really really well.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about. Okay, we're gonna start spoiling now. Okay,
Okay.
I think for a couple different reasons. Uh, Glenn Powell is starting to become the movie star,
That's so true.
right?
So
Like I think we've been looking for a movie star.
yeah. I mean, he just has that like bigger than life charm. I think there's been such a trend of TV and movie stars seeming kind of like real people to some degree. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
sort of that more like accessible, gritty indie film kind of feel, maybe. And
Sure.
he feels to me just like a return to that classic movie star. Like
Larger than
you would
life.
not see this person on the street. My husband quoted the show Community. I don't know if you're a fan, but
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
They refer at one point to someone as network TV good looking. And I feel like that applies very well to Glenn Powell.
It does. He's made some really smart. I think people are rooting for him now. I think, and there's this weird thing because he really kind of exploded with that smaller part in Maverick, where he's Hangman, and kind of famously, I think a lot of people know that he had gone for the role, of Goose's kid, and he didn't get it. And then Tom Cruise was like, just hang around. This is your moment's going to happen. And then he goes off and he's made, he made the movie with Sydney Sweeney. Did you see Hitman yet?
I haven't yet.
That was, oh my God, so much fun.
Like
on Netflix. We're going to do it on HATM because he's making really smart choices. Apparently he is just now signed on to do a remake of Backdraft.
Wow.
So I'm like, dude's making legacy films, and
he's
that's fine with me.
He's so funny too. I mean, he does like, the dramatic stuff, the action stuff. But after seeing Twisters on Friday, we started rewatching Scream Queens, which was this very short-lived dark comedy that he was in almost 10 years ago now, and he's hilarious in it.
Yeah, he's got the chops, and I feel like the chemistry he had with Daisy Edgar Jones was real, like in this film.
Oh, see, I have to agree with you. This was like one of the disappointments for me that I really liked Daisy Edgar Jones, but I felt like they didn't have chemistry. Did you feel chemistry? Yeah, I thought they had
yeah.
Oh, see, I thought they had really good like friend chemistry. But
that might explain why we don't get the kiss at the end.
Yeah, is that what we're going to talk about?
Which has been the big thing that's going around.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody's like, well, because they filmed it. They filmed a kiss.
Did they? Oh, I didn't know that.
At the airport.
Was it bad?
Oh, yeah. I watched it, too. Shit was hot. Maybe I'm just alone. I don't know.
Well, then why did they cut it?
Well, because they felt like, and I see why they wouldn't, right? Because the story's not about romance. It's not about them falling in love. I don't, of course I want to see them kiss because I want the guy to get the girl, right? As just I like the trope. Maybe the girl gets the guy, whatever, right? But yeah, it's almost. I think the idea is like maybe it's cliche that.
Well, I totally agree because as I was watching it, I was like, oh, I was like. Because of the reviews I read ahead of time and stuff, I thought that this was like a love triangle situation, but it's not at all. Mm-hmm. It's really just a movie about like a friendship forming over tornadoes. But then at the end, there's like this kind of turn toward like the romantic finish. And I was like, oh, I guess I was wrong. I guess they are falling in love.
Yeah, I think so. Like, there's clearly some heat going on there, except for then when he drills the thing down in the airport, I'm like, dude, you're in so much fucking trouble right now.
So
in my head, I'm like,
you
do not mess with the TSA.
Right.
Like, it's great. Yeah, they don't care how many followers, a million followers on the, that's just. I mean I like that he's like.
It's an amazing classic movie moment. And in 1996, it would have felt like perfect. But in 2024, you're like, oh, yeah, the Homeland Security Act is coming down on you real hard.
Right? Like, did we just make this into a history movie? We did, right? You're absolutely right. And like the begrudging thing, like, okay, I hated the friend. I hated him.
Javi,
I just was like, because he's so in love with her.
I love Anthony Ramos so much, though, and I felt like
I do too.
They did him an injustice in this movie.
Well, he had to do something, right? There had to be somebody who changes their way, and of course, she confronts the storm. Tyler doesn't have to change anything. I think maybe the idea is like when we first see him, he's this larger than life guy. We're not supposed to like him, but it turns out he's had a heart of gold the whole way. He's actually pretty consistent. Right. He's actually a very likable guy the whole way out. And we find some backstory. He got hurt. He was a bull rider. See, there's cattle history, ladies and gentlemen. And the whole there's some good catchphrases in this. But I don't know. Part of me wanted the kiss. I get why they didn't. I felt they had good chemistry. I actually didn't feel like he had great chemistry with Sydney Sweeney in their movie because I just didn't think she was that good of an actress in that film.
Interesting.
Right. But if you watch Hitman, he and Adria Arjona are just fire. So, anyway, okay, so like that. All right, let me ask you this. Okay. Let's do this. What is this film getting right? From you said you had some quibbles. We'll
Yeah.
we'll do
So
we'll do let's do some actual rivet counting on this one.
okay, so what
What
is
is this
getting
movie
right?
doing right and wrong,
This movie, I mean,
weather-wise?
you can see comments out there from meteorologists about this, but compared to Twister, like this movie paid a lot more attention to real tornado science. And so like a lot of the chatter in scenes about like what's happening in the atmosphere, almost to the point of being a little weirdly pedantic in moments where I was like,
Oh
are
shit, I was like
normal
that.
did you like that? Because when I was like, do normal audiences care about this? This
I
is
wanted to talk like my kid and be like, no cap,
okay.
for real.
Yeah.
But go on.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot more good scientific detail. Like there's clear attention to that. They're using actual software that research scientists are out there using right now, which is fantastic. I love that it's very clear that Lee Isaac Chung loves and appreciates this environment in a way that I feel like Twister did not. And I think that, a huge thing I've found in my research is that I would not have told you that storm chasers were big nature lovers, that was like a huge part of kind of the identity, especially early on. But they really are, they love the plains, they love the atmosphere.
Absolutely.
They love being out there on a day when no storm happens, but they can see the wildflowers on the Oklahoma, Texas prairie, And so I feel like this movie understood that, and it showed that in a way that was really fantastic. And I also think, it does a good job of showing that there are people out there chasing storms for a lot of different reasons, which is really real, right? You have people working for private companies, you have government researchers, you have YouTubers, you have tourists, you have just kind of regular people with, as they put it, a $10 app who can identify a storm and go out and get there. So that was really real too. So yeah, lots of good moments. As you noted, it was so great to see such a wide variety of types of people storm chasing. Love to see another great female lead in a storm chasing movie. People have always said that Helen Hunt was a huge inspiration to little girls who wanted to go into meteorology. And I think the Daisy Edgar Jones is going to do that again for them. And she's a badass, right? She's not only a badass.
She's goodness, right?
Yeah. She's not only courageous, but like her character is so smart and so creative. And, love that. And I love that at the end, she gets to go out by herself to be the hero. They literally leave all the dudes behind while she is out trying to stop the tornado. So I loved that. Yeah.
Yeah, I just dug it. I dug her mom. I like, okay, so when Maura Tierney showed up as her mom, I was feeling my age right there. I was like,
yeah,
Daisy Edgar, she's a grown up, but how is Maura Tierney? Because I watched Maura Tierney on ER.
Yeah.
Like when I was in high school, right? And so now the people, like, how do they have adult children? I was a little freaked out, but I was happy to see more Tierney actually back on. And we got a bit of the idea of the aunt from the first one.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It was like, come,
she feeds
you got to
them.
do the come home.
Yeah. She had good chemistry with Glen Powell.
I feel like most women are going to have good chemistry with Glen Powell. From what I've seen on Twitter, and like if Robin Mitchell's out there, like anyone but me. But I'm just saying, yeah, she was good. I also here's the other thing I really like. She goes back home. She walks in the house. She knows where everything is.
Yeah,
water pitcher, stuff like that. When I go back home to Kentucky, I go to my mom's house. I know there's a pitcher of sweet tea. It's in the blue pitcher and not the orange pitcher, because the orange pitcher has sweet tea in there, but it's a little less sugar for my mom's husband. Like the blue one is for like me. I know exactly what I'm going for. Like there's always that thing about going home when you haven't been home. What did you think about the choice to kill everybody off in like the first 5 minutes?
That was intense. I mean, I kind of knew it was coming because I had heard Kiernan Shipka was in this movie, but I couldn't figure out from any of the previews what she was in this movie. And then I was like, oh, I bet she died.
Was she in the early part of the movie?
Yeah, she's the friend with like the glasses, the girl.
No,
yeah.
I did not recognize her.
Yeah.
Also, talk about dating ourselves. Like, I watched her as a child on Mad Men, and now she's an adult.
I watched her on Sabrina in between, but yeah.
Okay, exactly, right? So I knew the boyfriend had to die.
Yeah,
like
all of them. It's intense.
Yeah, and I thought when he picked up the spike, the
Oh my
thing
gosh, I was
to
so
like do the
stressed. It was
leverage, I'm
such a
like,
good misdirect. I was like, he's gonna
I
get
was
struck
like,
by
oh my
lightning.
god, they're gonna impale him on that thing,
Oh, see,
you
I thought he
know?
was gonna be killed by lightning because they just had that whole conversation about being struck by lightning. And I guess in my research, I've read so much about the danger of lightning while storm chasing, and so I was just like, the
Oh,
whole
do
time I
tell.
had my hands like
What's
this.
the danger of lightning?
Oh, it's just a
Who
huge
knows?
danger if you're storm chasing, right? Because you're out there in a storm and you're on the plains and you're often the tallest thing around. And so, like, you think of tornadoes as being the threat, but lightning is one of the biggest environmental threats. And especially early on, like, there were several storm chasers who were either struck or had incredibly close calls and would tell these just crazy stories about, like, all being hit, like the lightning struck right near them and they all like passed out briefly and then they woke up and were like, am I dead? Is everyone dead? It's crazy.
Jesus.
Yeah.
I'm worried about lightning, not because I chase storms, but because I'm sure that God hates me. So that's my aspect. When it comes to that, all right. What drove you nuts?
Oh gosh.
Was there? Okay. Do you have a list?
Well, so this, I mean, there's a bunch of things, but in terms of like, I hope that most people watching it either can tell or will shortly figure out that you cannot stop a tornado in any way that we know. So I'll come back to that. But the thing that really stressed me out is that they're just so close to the tornado. Please don't get that close to a tornado. Please, I beg of you, if you're inspired by this movie to become a storm chaser, like learn a lot about storm chasing and know that storm chasers do not get that close to tornadoes. It's a very bad idea. You will probably die. Don't do it. And
So the
that
storm
was-
chasers stay farther. Storm chasers do not actually drive into said tornadoes.
Yeah, I mean, I hesitate to even say this, but there are a couple of people out there who are trying to like either think they have or have created vehicles that are clearly the inspiration for that truck and its like auger system
Right.
to drive into the ground. But yeah, for the most part, storm chasers, regardless of why they chase, stay farther away from tornadoes than that. In part because a lot of the reason that people storm chase, unless they're scientists, is to get really great photos, right? And you can't get great photos of a tornado when you're like inside of it. But it's a huge, I mean, one of the big problems with modern storm chasing is social media and just the intensity and this like pressure to one up each other and have increasingly exciting videos. And so like it's kind of stressful. People brag these days about how close they can get to a tornado. And, longtime storm chasers especially are like, man, that is not the way. That's not what we should be doing. And so, yeah, every time they are either in a tornado or right next to it. And it was like, man, these things can move at any moment, which we see in the movie to some degree. But yeah, it was very stressful for me to watch.
See, I feel like that's one of the things that the film does a lot of stuff well, but I feel like that's one of the cool parts about this was the social media aspect because it plays such a viral role. This guy, they don't like him because he's the storm chasing tornado wrangler. He's got the great shirts. It's not my first. What is it? Tornado.
Yeah.
I had to look at it twice. It's like,
yeah,
is that what it is? Yeah. But at the same time, like you totally get like. So I get the duality, and of course they do this really cool kind of a flip from the first film, where it's, but both leads have that intuition of, say, Bill Paxton's character,
right?
But it's the tornado wranglers who are the good guys who are not well funded,
right?
Yeah, they're the ragtag team that we find. Like, first, we don't feel like we're rooting for, but then we found out, of course, it's not tornadoes who are the danger; it's capitalism, right? It's the big land developer. Did you know? Do you know who David Cornswet is?
No,
Javi's buddy. He's playing Superman.
Oh,
in the next films.
I didn't even get a chance, but I meant to look him up afterwards because I was like, who is this guy?
He plays a dick really well.
He does.
But
yeah.
He's about to be. Listen, I'm sorry. I mean, Christopher Reeve is my Superman, but Henry Cavill did a really good job. So
yeah, absolutely.
I'm still ambivalent about how I feel about this. I want to ask you about your codfish moment.
What did you mean by this? I didn't know what this meant.
What's your codfish?
My jaw drop?
This? Okay.
No, I'm sorry.
No, so your codfish moment. We're gonna make this a thing. So help me God. When Joanne Freeman was on the pod, Joanne came up. We were talking about Benjamin Franklin, and we're talking about the negotiations after the American Revolution over cod fishing rights over the course of New England. And Joanne, as Joanne is wont to do, lost her goddamn mind because they were talking about fishing grounds and the rights of this. And she felt like it was so personal to her. So were there parts of this film that really spoke to you, maybe through your research or anything like that? Was there a moment in this movie that you were like, I get this. This is a thing that's specific that I would get that maybe other people who are not writing doctoral dissertations and later books, devoting their entire careers to storm chasing, the history of storm chasing. I get this.
Sure. Okay.
Was there a moment in there?
Kind of, but it's such a dumb one. My moment is the closing credits because they're showing all of these, like, I don't know if you remember, but there's all these like photos and videos kind of flashing in like grid form and stuff at the end. Mm-hmm. And some of it's like stuff from the film or extra footage, but huge amounts of it are archival storm chasing footage and photographs. And there are things that like I have looked at in the archive and I think of them, I think in a weird way, as like my photos. So even my husband, who's sitting next to me, who's like read all my stuff and seen all of it, was like, "Oh, that's Ted Vegeta." Like,
are you serious?
Yeah. And so it was sort of dorky, but for me, that was kind of the fun moment. It was like sitting in the archive and looking at all of these images all over again. But my other thing, this is a little less like the history research, but I wrote kind of a piece about how, so this whole movie is focused on this idea of stopping a tornado and whether you can come up with a way to stop it. And I wrote about how like there's no really evidence that this is possible. But one of the biggest issues is that it distracts from real boring things that we should be doing, right? Like improving building codes to keep up with tornado science. And so I loved that at the very end, and this is like a major spoiler, but when they're in that theater, and I think Javi or somebody, they're talking about whether there's a basement, and which is another pet peeve of mine. We'll come back to that. But they're talking about how there's no basement, and he says like, this thing isn't built to withstand what's coming for it. And I was like, building codes.
Right? Okay. Thank you for that. I had a beef that all of a sudden like they would not talk for 5 years.
Yeah.
That was a little,
I guess maybe
Kate
that's why
and
they
Javi
had
not
him.
talking. I mean, I guess the trauma and
I guess maybe that's why they like had him join the army, because then he was distracted. I don't know. Yeah.
He went back to Miami, but okay.
Right.
I guess. Actually, so this actually came into my own line of work. So let me go ahead and preface this. This podcast is in no way sponsored or supported by the United States Forest Service, federal government, your tax dollars, or anyone else. But in my own line of work, especially writing my own book about traditional indigenous cattle raising and stuff like that, and also the works what I do with tribes and things like that with the Forest Service, I kept thinking about the ways in which the way we look at wildfires have changed. Initially, for the longest time, American attitudes towards, say, wildfires were that they were destructive and had to be stopped at all costs, right? You know, the Smokey Bear thing, only you can prevent forest fires, stuff like that, right? Wildfires. And I kept thinking about looking at this in terms of like tornadoes are necessarily bad and they've got to stop them. And I'm like, when they start shooting that stuff up into the tornado, I'm like, wait a second, those are pollutants.
Right.
Those shouldn't be in the air. This cannot be good for us. Like are we shooting insulation into the air? Like what is it we're doing? And I also couldn't help but think that because we are in Oklahoma, where there are many indigenous communities there, a lot of the tribes that I get to work with on a daily basis are out that way. I was like, are we trying to bring, say, Western science into an indigenous ecosystem and provide these solutions when they're not really, like, we don't need to solve tornadoes. I think what you're talking about is like so much as we need to reconsider how we are living amongst them, you know? So I think that really kind of plays into your thoughts about, hey, building codes, which are not sexy.
Exactly.
Like firing rockets into a tornado. Yeah, that looked cool as shit.
Yeah.
But I think maybe we might be, the idea of like stopping a tornado to me felt naive.
Yeah.
It's like
naive and I don't know, just loaded with hubris, you know, this idea that like we can
that we
and
even could.
should stop it. And, I think too that you see in this movie and you see throughout kind of people, the way people talk about tornadoes, we tend to really anthropomorphize them, right? Like people
Mhm.
use hunting terms to talk about tornadoes, like bagging a tornado or wrangling, they're the tornado wranglers, right? They sort of compare
Right.
them to bulls. And it's, I mean, in many ways, Twister and Twisters are monster movies, right? That the tornadoes are sort of these sentient beings. There's even that line where Javi says, like, the tornadoes are coming after the people we love. And I think this is
Yeah.
like this incredibly human-centered pride to believe that like tornadoes are targeting us in some way, when in reality, like they're just doing their thing. They are there. And so yeah, it's really about kind of learning how to live with the atmosphere rather than fight against it, and understand the limits of the world and the environment we live in. And so many of the ways that have ever been floated to stop tornadoes, even far-fetched as they might be, would require the kinds of energy that would potentially do way more harm than an actual tornado would.
I just felt like this is also like the idea. Like, did you ever see the movie The Core
No.
with Hilary Swank and Aaron Eckhart? And
Oh,
like
that sounds familiar. Oh, I remember the previews for
it's
that.
yeah, it's so bad, but it's one of my comfort movies.
Okay,
Right?
sure.
It's like where they have to jumpstart the Earth's core because they had
Mm.
messed around with it. And I felt like this is what happens. Like we start shooting jelly beans into the sky, and then all of a sudden
Jelly
we've
beans.
got high fructose corn syrup polluting the atmosphere
Mhm.
around the world, and now there's a giant diabetes fund. I don't know, but like I felt like this kind of stuff is like what leads to the next even worse natural disaster. Right now we've
Mhm.
got, I don't know, M&Ms for instead of an ozone or something. I don't know. Um, that was and again I felt like it. I look at it and go, man, why are we trying to stop a thing that is so natural
Mhm.
to the earth, right? And I get like she's been hurt and she lost her boyfriend and all that, but they were trying, like, yeah. So, all right, I want to move on to another natural disaster known as Florida, and move on. Like I can bag on Florida.
Poor Florida.
Let's move to our section, our What the Florida section.
Yeah, yeah.
We set this movie in Florida. Is it a movie about hurricanes? Like, why don't we have a hurricane movie?
You said
There are
that,
people
and
trying to do
I
this.
I immediately thought about The Perfect Storm. Like, I think we do have hurricane movies, but what I think is interesting is that hurricanes, and it's why I kind of ignore like hurricane chasers, because it's such a different thing,
Mhm.
right? It's not hard to chase a hurricane. We generally know where
Not so
they're
much.
going. They're quite
Just kind of
large,
sit
so
and
you can't
wait.
really miss them,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that makes for really different movies too, because hurricanes end up being the setting more than like the target of the plot. And yeah, it's kind of harder for a hurricane to like be a MacGuffin in the way that a tornado can be.
Well, in some ways, I feel like you've got with the tornadoes and hurricanes, things like that. You have as a MacGuffin. I think you're right. You have almost a Jurassic Park problem, which
Mhm.
is you can only have dinosaurs do so many things, right? We can
Sure.
only, which again, which is the reason why I say the first Twister worked so well, and the second and this one works so well is because it's not really not about the storm so much as about the people and using the storm to kind of drive the human, I think, right? Have you ever been through a hurricane before? Have you ever sat through one?
I have not, no.
I've sat through more than I wish to count. Like I've sat through a bunch growing up. The first one I remember was growing up in Louisiana. Then I've sat through a bunch in Florida and stuff like that. And you know, you just kind of wait for them. You just kind of
Mm.
watch. And this is in some ways similar to tornadoes in Kansas, which I want to come back to in a second. But in Florida, it's like we're just kind of watching, like, how big is it going to be? If it's 3 or less, I'm not really going anywhere. If it's 4, I'm going to get out of
Mhm,
Dodge.
mhm.
If it's 5, there's no, like, God forbid there's a hurricane a 5 that hits, because 5 is just destructive. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew hit south of Miami, and people still talk about that hurricane
Sure.
in hushed tones. Much in the way there was one that hit in Kansas. Was it Green? Someone in Kansas is going to hit me on this. There have been some nasty storms that have hit.
Mhm.
You're from the Midwest. Have you sat
These
through many
days, yeah.
tornadoes? Huh?
Just a lot of I'm not originally from the Midwest, but I have lived here for quite a while, and,
Right. Okay.
yeah, I mean, many tornado warnings, I've never, like, come super close to a tornado. Ironically, when I was down in Norman doing research for my project,
Right.
there was actually a tornado that kind of skirted Norman while I was down there. So that was exciting. But yeah, no, not in the same way. But again, part of that's like, if you're not either A, unfortunate enough to be actually struck by a tornado, or B, going out to try to find one, like they just actually don't happen that much, and they're so small. It's not like a hurricane, right, where tons of people experience it.
Yeah, I think that the scary thing about tornadoes is like the difference is like they feel so random.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And they talk about this in the first film where Helen Hunt's like, you don't know what it's like.
Yeah.
It skips this house and this house and this house, and then it comes after you. And again, it's getting back to the idea, right? But I remember, so I want to give to you, like, when I moved to Kansas in 2010, which is actually amazing, aside from the food. And I remember being terrified because I'd heard like everything we know about Kansas, Wizard of Oz, everything else, tornadoes, right? And we'd get tornado warnings, and I'd duck down in the basement. And none of the locals would do this. They would just go outside on their patios. They'd go on their front porch and watch the sky. I remember watching talking like a good my friends. And I eventually became this person too. And they would just, my friend Levi'd like, hey, when the wind stops moving and the sky turns turquoise, that's when you go downstairs. Otherwise, just go watch it. It's cool. I mean, they were so completely comfortable with this, and it was like they didn't really. There was like a running joke that when one particular weatherman in Wichita got scared, that's when you got worried.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you're solid. There are all these anecdotal stories about this more than anything else. So
my story is super similar. Like I'm from the West originally, but when I came out here to Missouri for undergraduate, I was the same. Like the siren would go off and I'd try to, go straight to the basement of our dorm. And all of my friends who were from Missouri are like, what are you doing? It's nowhere near here.
Right. Just totally fun. And then it wipes out some small town. Right. Now I would always hear like Wichita's fine because the city puts off too much heat.
Right.
There's like too much heat coming off the concrete, off the whatever. I'm like, okay, I guess.
Yeah. I loved that they added that moment in the movie where they're in that like motel office and the woman is standing there and they're like, it's a tornado. And she's like, nah, 9 times out of 10, it's a false alarm, because like that's so true. It's so
very much so, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they got in the truck and they got theirs.
Right.
Like, this movie killed more people than the first Twister.
It did, although it killed them less gruesomely.
I know. This is much more family-friendly disaster film.
They just keep getting sucked away cleanly rather than pulverized by flying debris.
Well, you remember the first one with Carrie Elwes had the
it's so brutal.
I was like, are you going to do that? Maybe they were just teasing us that when the boyfriend picked up the piece of iron at first.
We knew what we expected.
I guess so. I did like the idea of setting towards the end. I'm in a movie theater and the movie theater is getting destroyed. I'm like, okay, this is very meta and I like what you're doing. I know what you're doing here. This is fun.
And you probably remember that in Twister, right? They're in that drive-in theater too, at a pivotal scene.
Yeah. They're a fun little throwback, little flashbacks. I went back to read today. Like, there were very conscious decisions to dress Kate in ways similar to
obviously, that white tank
top, with the khaki.
Yeah. Exactly.
It was fine with me. I was okay with this. Like, listen, if you guys are going to drool all over Glenn Powell, I feel like I in turn I'm also allowed to.
Yep.
All right, this movie is now 2 days old.
Yeah.
Came out on July 19th, the greatest day in American history. So, what scene out of this do you think is gonna, or is there a quote? What's the most historic scene or quote do you think coming out of this? If you're gonna predict the future, like, much like we're trying to predict tornadoes, is there something that you think is gonna last out of this?
Gosh, I mean, that is hard to say. I was trying to think like what scene really stuck in my mind, and it may just be actually kind of that scene at the end of her driving across the field in that truck with all the barrels behind. It's like that kind of epic, like headed toward the storm But I really love the chicken landing on their car, which is the much
Thank
stupider
you.
moment. But
Love the chicken. It's the cow moment.
yeah, exactly. And I wondered if it was a little bit of a nod. I don't know if you've seen Minari, Lee Isaac Chung's last movie, but
I have.
his like family history with the poultry industry. I wondered if that was like a little bit of a nod there. And then we talked about already, it's so unlikely, but that moment at the end where he uses the augers to dig into the parking lot outside what I assume is the Oklahoma City airport. Like, it's a pretty classic movie moment, and Paul Scheer is the perfect actor to be there to play off.
Did that not feel like straight out of like a Tom Hanks Meg Ryan film?
Yeah, a little bit. Although
like a 1990s,
way more like testosterone-y than Tom Hanks, but yes.
Yeah. I want to give you my thoughts on this. I think mine are actually quotes.
Great.
One is actually, if you feel it, chase it.
Okay.
I just felt like, when he's talking to her, when he's talking to Kate, the thing is like, you don't run from your fears, you ride them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I get it. Also, I think going into the Glenn Powell like montage at the end of his career, the walking through the rain and the white shirt with the cowboy hat,
it's pretty classic.
Apparently, they almost cut that
interesting
2 seconds from the film. Would have been dumb.
It's very important.
I don't know.
Yeah.
All right.
I have to say too, the line I really like too is the asshole saying like, I guess we're listening to Dandelions now, was my one of the quotes I really liked.
I like how you're just calling him the asshole.
I don't remember what his character's name is.
I don't either. I'm just like, that's Superman. No, and it doesn't like you knew really kind of the first time we saw him, like, this guy's a prick, right? They've got the team full of PhDs. I'm like, yeah, whatever, it's fine. I'm so utterly unimpressed with my own I know you're finishing yours, so I'm just like, whatever, give a shit anymore. How do you think this film compares to the original?
Okay, so I love the original film. I keep reminding people that it did not do well with critics when it came out. I think there's this weird memory that maybe it was very popular with critics. It was just popular, but critics were not impressed by it. And I think,
are we critics now?
Let's say we're commentators.
Ooh, we're analysts. Go on.
Yeah, exactly. I think this movie, to some degree, this movie may be trying to do a little too much. Like, there's a lot more here than in Twister, which was a pretty simple, straightforward. But I do really like there's a stronger emotional arc, I think, in this movie. And there's something intriguing about her switching teams partway through that the original movie maybe lacks. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, I like the switching of the teams thing, and again, I think that's the chemistry thing going on. But that's fine. Do you have a favorite? Do you like one more than the other? Is you're kind of thinking about the two now?
Ooh, I mean, it's hard. Your first love always kind of hangs with you. It's hard to, get rid of that feeling of having seen Twister when you're young and that 90s blockbuster. And now I know too much in some ways,
right?
I watched Twister innocently.
Well, this is a really good cast.
It's loaded, yeah.
Go back and look at that original cast too. It's like you have Philip Seymour Hoffman is like the 15th guy in that film, throwing out Star Wars quotes.
Yeah. There are actors in this movie that I hope 20 years from now we will be like, can you believe they were in Twisters in that tiny role?
I think that's entirely possible. Again, this movie is 48 hours old, but I mean, I came away with this really, really satisfied. You're working on your dissertation now, and I should stop saying that, because when people would ask me about my dissertation, I would like, I hate you so much. I hate you almost as I hate this dissertation. Since this is a history podcast, what are the books on tornado wrangling that you dig? Is there stuff out there at all, Kate? What is there?
So I'll just say up front that there are a ton of books out there written by storm chasers, and while they're not necessarily history books, obviously they have their own awesome perspectives on what storm chasing has been like to them. And they, of course, are packed with amazing photos often. So I highly recommend if you're really into storm chasing, just check those out. They're really fun. Like Warren Fadley, Howie Bluestein has great stuff. Roger Hill has one. They're all sorts of good things. There's also a biography out there about Tim Samaras, who was the first and his team, but the first really sort of storm chasers killed by, as far as we know, a tornado while they were chasing. And so this biography called The Man Who Caught the Storm is a great sort of introduction to that story. But to go for a more like historian academic, the first one I'll suggest is actually not about really tornadoes at all, but it's Christine Harper's book Make It Rain, which is a history of weather control, which is super relevant, obviously, to this movie. And I think is really interesting, all about sort of just like the bureaucratic wrangling over the question of weather control and all the ways people have looked at it in the U.S. So that one's really cool. I also grabbed this one. So it's by Marlene Bradford. It's called Scanning the Skies, A History of Tornado Forecasting. This lovely cover first came out in 2001, but I just saw that the University of Oklahoma Press is re-releasing it next month, August, in paperback, which is smart of them, I think.
Did you know that is actually the best press in the history of book presses?
Yeah, I've heard that. The best books come out of there.
That is correct. Only the best books. Go on.
Exactly. So this one is just a super focused history of tornado forecasting especially in Norman, Oklahoma, and the National Severe Storms Lab. It doesn't actually really talk much about storm chasing, which I see my book being kind of like the partner to this one of like that side. But it has really cool stuff about like all of the technology and things that emerged. Of course, it's 23 years old now, so a lot of things have happened since it was published, but it's a great start. And then the other one I really wanted to mention is one that came out 2 years ago now, I think, by a historian of religion, Peter
Holy
Thusen.
Shit, that's a cool name for a book.
Yes. So this is Tornado God, American Religion and Violent Weather. And it's a fantastic book. So it's all about how Americans sort of think of tornadoes spiritually, which is really cool. Like talking about how people talk about them as acts of God, how they, feel that sort of random feeling of tornadoes really lends itself to feeling like a higher power is influencing like whose house is taken out and whose isn't. So Dr. Thusen does an amazing job of looking at that sort of cultural history around tornadoes. I'm so glad this book exists and I highly recommend it. And then there's a popular history I thought I'd mention too by Lee Samlin called Storm Kings, America's First Tornado Chasers. Lee clearly has a different definition than I do of tornado chasers because he starts with like Ben Franklin and goes up until basically where my project starts, about to the 60s. But he's really interested in early tornado history, what people are doing early on. Yeah, so that's a fun one too. So yeah, those are my recommendations.
Also, thank you for like giving us a pop history. I love pop histories, like full on. Like I'm the biggest like those. Yeah, absolutely. I dare ask you.
Yeah.
Obviously, your book's not. How's your disc coming? Like, where are you in the process?
Yeah, the plan is to defend in December, and then I'm
oh shit, you're soon.
Yeah. That's the plan.
Please, is it done? Like,
no.
Where are you now? Like, tell me about. I won't ask you too much, but like, how big is it? How many chapters do you have? Like, I want to know.
Yeah. So it's. I guess
give me a broad overview of your book.
Yeah. So I call it a social and scientific history of storm chasing. It goes from kind of late 50s, like I talked about, until I think I'm going to actually end with Twister for the dissertation, but the book will go farther. But I have to get out of here at some point. So
yes, you have to finish.
Yeah. So that's the plan right now. And then like it's 5 chapters. 4 of them are in draft stage and are being revised, and then I have a 5th one to wrap up. And then the plan is to turn toward hopefully maybe publishing it as a trade book with much shorter chapters, because I hope that the love of Twisters shows that there's a lot of people out there really interested in storm chasing and learning more about it, and I want to reach that broader audience.
Have you started writing the introduction yet?
I mean, in the sense that I have a file called Notes for Introduction that whenever like a sentence pops into my head, I jot it down. But yeah.
I hated writing. I'm sure you've heard this, but the introduction is the hardest thing to write. Like, And also the conclusion, like, I just spent 250 pages telling you what's in this thing. Why do I have to tell you again?
Yeah.
Like, I wanted to do an epilogue, and David, my advisor, was like, no, you have to write a conclusion. I'm like, I conclude that I'm tired of being at the University of Minnesota. I just want to be, let me leave for the love of God. So anyway, all right. Kate, this has been fun.
Yes, it has.
Thank
Thanks
you
so
for
much
taking
for
the
having me
time
on.
this totally non-historic day.
Totally non-historic. I'm just glad that the weather is normal.
Well, I'm glad you were here, and thank you for popping in today. And
anytime.
everybody
I'm
go watch
always
this movie.
Yes, and then tell us what you thought about it.
Yes, and if you're still here, I'm told by my producers that I have to tell you to like and subscribe to this podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else, so that my producers will stop yelling at me. So
good job, producers.
That's good.
Yeah.
I try so hard. All right.
All right. Thanks, Jason.